Welcome to Stories from the Road. I'm your host, Owlbear Boffin, halfling culinary chronicler extraordinaire. And let me tell you about some of the most memorable adventures I've been on in the search of good eats. Of course, it's about the food, but it's also about the people we dine with that make the meal memorable. Today, I'll be telling you about my favorite bowl of owlbear stew I have ever eaten. So without further ado, let's begin. The deeper you go into the forest, the quieter it gets. It's not always the silence of tranquil peace, but the sort of silence that presses against your ears until even your breath feels loud. Like you're at risk of being caught doing something you shouldn't when you're just wandering through the trees. With every step, the forest seems to lean inward, listening to each breath and conspiring to keep you meandering in circles. There's no trails, no birdsong, just the crackle of twigs and the dried moss underfoot to punctuate the cadence of your heavy breaths. Now I've cooked in dungeons, I've feasted in ruins, and I've brewed tea in putrid swamps, but few places unsettle me as much as a conspicuously silent forest. Now, I had only meant to spend an hour, maybe two, in the forest chasing down the sweet-spored moss caps that grow along the shadowed bases of the elder yew trees. They lend a delightful depth of flavor when stewed with broth or mutton, and I've been craving something comforting. But yew trees are tricksters. They always seem to shift when your back is turned, just enough to muddy the trail. It was only after the second hilltop looked identical to the first that I realized I was thoroughly, irretrievably lost. Not an uncommon state for a halfling with more curiosity than caution, mind you, but it was getting late, and my feet were starting to complain in earnest. Still, the forest was lovely in that brooding pine sap and shadow sort of way, and I figured at worst I'd find a stream and follow it back to some form of civilization, hopefully one with a fire and tea. But, as I was lost, both in my thoughts and geographically, a high-pitched scream cut through the silent woods. As I listened closer, that scream seemed to be intended as more of a bellow or a war cry, but the individual was betrayed by a voice crack, changing the delivery of their mighty announcement. I crept through a thicket and spotted him. A wiry, shirtless boy in leather scraps and war paint. He was standing on a stump with a spear that was too big for him, and a whistle hanging from his neck. His arms were thin but sun-scarred, and his expression was fierce, but his stance was uncertain, as if he had practiced bravery more than he felt it. He beat his chest and continued his routine of half bellowing, half screeching, but the forest continued to respond with silence. As I sat there confused at his intentions, he put the whistle to his lips and blew. The sound that followed was uncanny, a deep, echoing hoot growl. Oh no. All at once I understood what he was doing. A hoot growl, to any of you city slickers who have never lived in the woods, is the last thing you want to hear when you're deep in the wilderness. It's the signature call of the owlbear, a straightforward name for an ungodly amalgamation of fur and feather. And the only reason you would imitate a hoot growl yourself is to attract the attention of that very beast. The moment it came together, I dashed out of the thicket yelling at him. "Hey kid, what idiotic compulsion could push you to commit suicide by owlbear?" I asked. He turned to me, startled with eyes wide. "Wait, who are you? This is a sacred rite. You shouldn't be..." But before he could finish with his naive indignation, we both heard it. No, felt it is a better description. In the middle of the still forest, every little sensation is magnified tenfold. The rustling of the leaves, the reverberating of the earth, and then a real hoot growl, not just the mimicry of his whistle. "Get down," I shouted, then tried to jump on him to get him into the thicket. But he was quick and evaded me before charging into the very direction of the beast. What happened next was a flash. It appeared, massive, feathered, with pelt matted with burrs and old blood. The boy screamed and charged. The owlbear swiped, its claws raking the air where he had just been. But the boy was fast, much faster than I expected. He rolled, scrambled, and dug the spear into the beast's thigh, but he was nowhere near strong enough to drive the weapon in to find true purchase. It looked like it just nicked the beast, and the boy continued to fight. Each swipe of the owlbear narrowly missed its mark, but each one missed by less. As the boy continued to dodge and weave, he wasn't able to capitalize on any of the chances he got to wound the beast. It seemed he would need to take it down with paper cuts. But all the owlbear needed was one good hit. And as the boy began to lose steam, the owlbear got it. A hard swipe into the shoulder sent the boy flying into the bush next to me. As the owlbear came closer to investigate the body of his victim, I panicked. I threw my spice satchel at the creature's eyes. Desert pepper and bristlemint burst in a puff of stinging powder, blinding and confusing the beast. "Time to run, brave hunter," I shouted, dragging him into the thicket with me. Behind us, the owlbear howled, confused and enraged, swiping blindly at the cloud of scent and pain. We kept running as the sound faded into the woods behind us, and then we kept on running further just to be safe. As my lungs felt they were about to pop, we finally slowed down. The boy groaned, cradling his side, and I could see the blood dripping down his shoulder. The rended flesh would make for a nasty scar, but it didn't look life-threatening. I pulled a packet of powdered fey whistle and mixed it into water, handing him the cup. "You're lucky," I said, catching my breath while leaning against an old tree and searching through my pack for my bandages. "That beast was about to make a chew toy out of you. Why did you even But before I could finish chastising him, he just looked at me wide-eyed, then looked towards the ground and sullenly said, "I failed." I felt the pain of that realization was much worse for him than the pain of his injuries. So I decided to save the lecture for another day. "No, you lived, which means you get to try again. Let's get you patched up first, though," I told him. The boy didn't answer me, but he didn't fight either as I began to clean his wounds. His jaw was clenched like he expected me to mock him, and I was impressed that his ego was more damaged than his body, because he had taken a really hard hit, but he barely winced as I bandaged him up. Once he was in a slightly better shape, I asked, "What's your name, kid?" He mumbled something into his shoulder. What was that?" I asked again. "Peck," he said, almost in a whisper. "My family calls me Peck. I don't have a grown name yet." "Ah, Peck. I have to say, you're a brave one. Not many would charge into battle against a beast like that, and even fewer would call it right towards them. Now, sit for a while, I'm gonna grab some firewood." He didn't protest, and he slumped against the tree. Now that the shock and adrenaline were wearing off, it looked like the wear on his body hit him all at once. I put a blanket from my pack around him and set off to use the last of the dwindling twilight. I returned maybe half an hour later to him completely passed out. Not too surprising considering what he had been through. I got the fire started right as the cover of darkness completely overtook the forest, and dug through my bag for the little bit that I was able to forage as I had searched for the wood. Some wood ear mushrooms, a bit of edible lichen, and some wild garlic. That, along with some of the last bit of salted venison in my pack, would be enough for a little soup. As I got the pot on the fire, the boy started to wake. I got my canteen out and put some water in a kettle for tea. "So, Peck, why did you really go after that owlbear? I don't see you as much of a seasoned hunter." He took a sip, then sat up a bit taller. He cleared his throat and told me, "It's a right in my clan. To be a man, you must fell an owlbear. It's not until you craft your own necklace of its claws that you can be considered an adult. And well, I'm a little late to do it. My brother did it when he was 13. "And how old are you now, Peck?" I asked. "I'll be 23 next month," he responded. I did my best to hide my shock. He looked just like a kid. I wouldn't have guessed anything over 15. He continued, "When I was growing up, I couldn't wait to turn 13. That's when my big brother became an adult, and I was sure it's when I would too. Well, I didn't get that same growth spurt as he did. So I kept waiting. And eventually, it wasn't just that I didn't get that growth spurt at 13. I never got it at all. But I've been waiting now for 10 years. There was a long pause as he stared into the young fire. His gaze was piercing through it like he would find consultation in the flames as he tried to organize his words for what he would say next. I knew I wasn't ready, but how much more ready can I get? I've spent the last 10 years being asked by my father why I can't be more like Joseph. I'd rather die an adult than spend another 10 years being treated like a child by him." I didn't answer right away. I just passed him a bowl of the steaming soup and let it sit with the silence. We ate together quietly. I'm not always the best with my words, but I do find that feeding someone can convey my emotions a lot better than any of my speeches. As we finished, I finally broke the silence. Well, if you're set on proving something, let's prove it. You do have a sharp eye and a quick step. I saw it. And by the way, you also have a broken arm. So you're definitely not winning any fistfights with the beast. Let's use your head instead and plan it right. He looked at me, uncertain but not unwilling. All right, I said, pulling a stick from the fire and using it to sketch a rough map in the dirt. This is where we last saw it, just east of the slope where I found you, near that crescent ridge. There's cover there, old deadfall and some thorn brush. Good terrain if you're clever, bad terrain if you're loud, but you look like you can make the most of it. Peck leaned over, watching the lines appear with furrowed brows. Wait, you want me to hide from it? No, I want you to survive it, ideally. Hide, watch, track, then lure it in with your whistle at the right time. The beast doesn't move for long without leaving signs, so get ahead of it, read the ground, and learn how it moves. Find a pattern. He scowled at me. That's not how it's supposed to be done. Oh, the Owlbear wrote you a rule book, did it? I jested. He didn't laugh, not even a smirk. He just shook his head. I mean, it's not honorable. You're supposed to face it, not trap it, not run. You face it head on, spear in hand, like Josen did. I set the stick down and looked at him. Did Josen have a busted arm when he did it? I asked. Peck bristled, opening his mouth, then closing it without saying anything. Did he fight completely alone? I continued. Or did he have years of your father's favored training and a lot more muscle on his side? That's not fighting completely on his own. He didn't answer. You want honor, I said gently. But honor without strategy is just poetry for corpses. I'm not saying don't fight it. I'm saying fight smart. Use your gifts. He stood abruptly, turning from the fire. I don't need tricks, and I don't need traps. Or help. All right. No tricks, no help. If you want a clean fight, it's yours. But at least promise me that you'll take the fight in a place you can make the most of it. I won't interfere. You can do the hunting, you can do the tracking, all on your own. He looked at me, uncertain. I held up both hands. Promise. I won't throw spices. I won't blind it. I'll stay put and I'll watch. You really mean that? He asked. I do. Believe me. I'll be honest, I couldn't fight it if I wanted to. But I will help you plan. That doesn't make your fight dishonorable. It just makes it possible. He sat back down slowly, the fire casting shadows under his eyes. I'll track it at dawn, he said quietly. Alone. Good, I replied, refilling his tea. But tonight, we plan together. Just strategy, no interference. He gave a single nod, still proud and stubborn, but a little more open. Let's find the kind of victory that feels like yours, not your father's, I said. Then we spent the night planning. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of pine dew and the quiet shuffle of Peck tying his makeshift sling together. The forest had not found its voice overnight, but the silence felt different this morning. More like a held breath than a curse, the kind of silence that's waiting with rapt attention for something special. He didn't say good morning, but he did take the bit of dried meat I had handed him, the last from my pack. I scouted before sunrise and prepped the area. I found a good place, he muttered, chewing. The owlbear was wandering around a cave, maybe a half-mile from the ridge. Its left hind leg is favoring. I guess my spear did more than I thought after all. Well, it looks like you know the path you're going through then. You know where you're going to lead it to, right? I said, pointing at the map I'd drawn in the dirt. Don't make it too obvious where you're leading it, though. Blow your whistle, then bring it back to where you really want to engage it. Make it fight you, not the other way around. He nodded, sharpening the makeshift dagger that he had made from the spear tip last night. I watched him work in silence, one good arm steady, his eyes scanning the tree line as if he could already see the outcome that was written there. Josen may have had the muscle, but Peck had his own bag of tricks. We walked in silence towards the slope. The sun filtered in shafts between the trees, catching the dust and pollen in lazy halos. Peck found a break in the ridge just deep enough to act as a trap, a shallow bowl between two rocky outcrops. It was ringed with brambles and sloped on the far end. There was no room to run wild, and no room to charge, and only one way in. Limited approach angles. He was a smart lad. He had an eye for this. He walked the space twice. He marked distances with stones, then checked wind direction. He even asked me politely this time if I could rub crushed garlic root along the side of the trees to mask our scent trail. I could tell he was looking for more and more things to do to prepare, drawing out the time until the inevitable. But eventually, he took a deep breath and turned to me and said, "No matter what happens, don't step in." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, seating myself on a flat stone just outside the ridge. "Unless you scream something like, 'Please help, Adalbert, I beg of you,' in which case I may throw you a stick." He chuckled, just once, but I took it as a good omen. And then he got in position, and he blew the whistle. It didn't take long. The hoot growl came again, low and furious. The owlbear emerged in an uneven charge, beak twitching, eyes narrow. Its feathers looked more ragged than the day before, but even injured, it was terrifying. A cathedral of sinew and talons, born of instinct and rage. Peck didn't wait. He darted from cover to cover, baiting it backward, always just outside its reach. Every few paces he would pelt it with another stone from his sling. His aim was dead on. Last night he told me how he had often practiced in the fields when guarding the flocks. However, his father had looked down on the weapon as one for cowards. But believe me, Peck looked nothing like a coward now. He was light on his feet, even with the bad arm, and his eyes were focused. He was making the most of the terrain he had chosen, and as the owlbear lunged, he vaulted backward up the slope, forcing it to rise after him. He continued baiting it up the slope, staying just out of reach until he had crested the ridge. The beast roared, rearing up, but in its rage, it didn't see just where he was leading it, and lost its footing, tumbling forward down the other side of the steep, slick incline, and fell halfway sideways into the brambles. Peck seized the moment. He dropped his sling, then jumped from the top of the ridge and drove the dagger into the owlbear's exposed neck, again and again as the beast tried to find its footing and shake him off. The owlbear bellowed out in pain and threw Peck off, but Peck was ready and caught himself. The owlbear was gored, bleeding, but its bestial rage drove it forward, charging Peck again in the domed battlefield. However, its claw swipes found no purchase. Its lunges and bites never connected. Peck kept weaving up and down the slope, bouncing between the brambles and loose rocks. He was in his element, and the beast was starting to bleed out. It must have been less than a minute, but it felt like hours watching Peck narrowly dodge each and every attack, vaulting up and down the ridge. If a single swipe connected, he'd be knocked down with nowhere to run, and he'd be an easy snack for the owlbear. I wouldn't even be able to save him at that point. His choice of location was truly high risk, high reward, but the gamble paid off. As the owlbear lost steam, Peck saw an opening to end it. The beast had been favoring one side due to its bad leg, and with a wild grace, Peck dashed to the beast's right, connecting another deep cut directly into the neck again. It was a decisive stab, one that Peck had complete and utter faith in the outcome of. The creature screamed, a wild, agonized sound. It thrashed, and Peck went flying to the side of the ridge, landing on his bad arm. But before it could charge again, it staggered back and collapsed in a heap that shook the earth. Silence returned. And then slowly, Peck stood. Blood on his brow, hands trembling, his eyes focused on the beast's corpse, unwilling to let out a single breath until he was completely sure it wouldn't get up again. He looked to me. I didn't say a word. I just offered a nod. That was enough to grant him the permission to exhale. He sat down beside the carcass and didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, he removed a bone-pommeled knife from his belt and began cutting free a claw. We worked in quiet harmony after the kill. Well, I worked. Peck mostly sat and winced quietly while insisting he didn't need rest. The owlbear was heavy, even with its soul departed, but its mass obeyed gravity and leverage, and I'd carved bigger beasts with worse tools. I freed the pelt, then got started on the haunch meat. It was dense and a dark maroon with a gamey scent like smoked boar and cedar bark. Thank goodness it was a springtime owlbear. I just took enough. We couldn't carry it all, and it felt wrong to strip the meat bare, so I left the rest to the forest. And just as I did, I spotted a nice surprise out of the corner of my eye. Next to one of the yews growing on the ridge was a perfect bunch of moss caps. It took a little while, but it looks like my little adventure was worth it. We returned to our camping spot from the night before, and Peck helped me with the fire, collecting stones for a ring with his one good arm, and fanning coals with the vigor of someone who was pretending to be just fine. I charred off the owlbear meat in the pot in some oil, then removed it and made a paste in the pot with flour and a little bit of the spices that I still had at the bottom of my bag after I had tossed my spice pouch the day before. Then I added water to the pot, along with some pine needles, garlic, and some of the moss caps. Then finally the chunks of browned owlbear meat. As the stew simmered away, I dressed Peck's wounds. This is becoming a daily occurrence, I jested, as I reset the broken arm he had fallen on, and bound it with a bandage and splint. You have a good village healer, right, I hope? I'm not too well versed in the magic stuff, I told him. Yes, Clara will be able to fix me up once I head back, he responded. He was still lost in the post-battle glow, so I let him bask in it. When the stew was finally ready, I ladled it into 2 wooden bowls. Peck took his with quiet reverence and didn't speak until the second bite. Thank you, he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes, for everything. I didn't fight the owlbear, I said, pulling out some more salt. I was just here to cook it. You did more than that, he said, thankfully. I avoided his praise. You'll have a scar, you know, I told him, gesturing to his shoulder. You best tell your father the beast caught you in the final blow, but you were able to kill it first. The last-minute triumph type of tale. It makes for a stronger story. No, I think I'll tell him the truth, he said. He opened his mouth to continue, but then closed it, content with his answer. Yeah, I think I'll tell him the truth. That earned a soft smile for me. When the fire burned low, I handed him the final gift, the owlbear's pelt. I had skinned and cleaned it while the stew cooked. It was rough in some places, but the colors were deep and proud, with the feathers still clinging to the nape. Peck blinked. You're giving me this? Someone has to wear it home, I said, brushing the soot from my apron. Might as well be the one who earned it, so go get a good cloak made from it. He held it like a banner, like something more than just fur and hide, and to him it definitely was. We packed up what we could, and I left him with some healing salve for his shoulder, a jar of the owlbear stew for the way home, and a recipe scribbled on the back in case he got nostalgic for it. He offered me one of the owlbear claws, which I politely declined. I don't collect trophies, I just collect meals. At the edge of the ridge, where the trees opened just enough to see the path winding toward the valley, I turned to him one last time. Peck, I said. It takes strength to kill a beast, but today you showed a lot more than strength. Good job, kid. He nodded, not like a boy trying to impress, but as a man who finally felt comfortable in his own skin. And then, like I always do, I wandered on, back into the trees and on to my next recipe. A halfling, a satchel, and the smell of owlbear stew clinging to my cloak. I hope you enjoyed. Just like my last story from the road, I will be releasing this as a one-shot adventure that you can play with your party. As always, my content is completely free and available for download for your own table at my Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com/eatingthedungeon. If you have any requests for future monsters or topics, please let me know, and I hope you have a great day.